Every year, the stars gather in Hollywood for the annual presentation of the Academy Awards. And the world tunes in to see which star gets to take an Oscar home. But for the people who make the movies, the Academy's top prize isn't the Oscar. It's the Irving G. Thalberg Memorial Award. Unlike the Oscar, the Thalberg Award isn't handed out every year. Over the decades, just a few of Hollywood's greatest filmmakers have been called to the stage to claim it as their own.
Ladies and gentlemen, the familiar figure of Alfred Hitchcock.
Mr. Clint Eastwood.
George Lucas.
Saul Zaentz.
Warren Beatty.
Steven Spielberg.
Named for one of Hollywood's most legendary filmmakers, the Thalberg Award is given to creative producers personally responsible for a consistently high quality of motion picture production. A standard of quality set during Hollywood's golden age by Irving G. Thalberg himself.
Thalberg was all-powerful during the sound age. And I think it's safe to call him a genius.
He was a titan in his own way, a quiet titan.
In the 1920s and 30s, Thalberg dazzled Hollywood with a series of films for MGM that reached new heights of both art and profits.
It's like an oxymoron. He was a businessman and at the same time extremely creative in making films.
That's why they called him the Boy Wonder, because more than anybody else, he had that vision.
On March 5th, 1936, Irving Thalberg picked up an Academy Award of his own.
It's a pleasure to present this award to you for producing the best picture of 1935, Mutiny on the Bounty. Mr. Capra, it is obvious but nevertheless true for me to say that I am happy that Mutiny on the Bounty won this award.
For the 36-year-old Thalberg, this triumphant moment capped a great comeback. Just 3 years earlier, he had been betrayed by his business partners, stripped of his dream job as head of production at MGM, and suffered a heart attack that brought him to the brink of death. But Irving Thalberg had refused to give up.
He rose to the challenge, and that's part of his mythology, I think, and part of the reason that so many people just venerated him.
Thalberg had been rising to the challenge since May 30th, 1899, when he was born with a defective heart.
Thalberg was born in New York. His parents had come from Europe. He was rather a sheltered boy because his health was rather fragile.
In 1916, a case of rheumatic fever forced Thalberg to miss almost a year in school.
Thalberg used this time for his education. His mother fed him books, classical books, Shakespeare, all kinds of things that would improve his thoughtfulness and his mind.
But by the time Thalberg recovered, the rheumatic fever had done even more damage to his heart. Doctors told him he could expect to die young. For the rest of his life, this diagnosis would haunt Thalberg and drive him to make the most of the time he had left. Fortunately, he would only have to wait until he was 18 to get started.
His big break came when he went to visit his aunt, who had this wonderful beach house in Long Island. And just by chance, Carl Laemmle, the founder of Universal, had his little beach house next door. Isn't that convenient?
Laemmle's Universal Pictures was one of America's most successful film studios. In Long Island, he often used his neighbors as a test audience for his latest releases.
Laemmle would have outdoor screening parties, and of course Irving would go over there. And it was just one of the most idyllic kinds of events for Irving, because he just loved to relax and he loved movies and to be on the beach. And I mean, it is just paradise. Carl Laemmle took a shine to this young man. And eventually, he was offered a job to work in the offices in New York City, which was the Universal headquarters. And there he could see what was going on in the business aspect of Universal Pictures.
Thalberg saw even more after he moved up from office boy to a job as private secretary to the boss himself. And the boss had a lot of problems. His profits were flat, his stars were defecting to rival studios, and his managers out in Hollywood couldn't seem to turn things around. When Laemmle headed west to find out why, he took Thalberg along.
The trouble basically was that the studio was in disarray. There was money being spent irresponsibly. And Carl, when he'd go there, everybody was doing fine and everybody was showing their best face. And he needed somebody, a spy, I'll put it bluntly. He needed a spy there to watch things for him.
Soon Thalberg was giving Laemmle detailed reports about what was going wrong at the studio and making suggestions on how the problems could be fixed.
And eventually, when Irving gave his full report, Irving suggested there should be a new position of studio manager, and Carl thought it was the greatest thing in the world, because Carl wanted this studio to be organized.
And Carl Laemmle was certain that the 20-year-old Irving Thalberg was just the man for the job.
Laemmle went back to New York, but he left Thalberg in charge of the studio at a time when he was very young. He was head of production at Universal when he was too young to sign the checks.
Thalberg was now in charge of a major filmmaking operation that sprawled over hundreds of acres, employed dozens of people, and earned over $2 million a year. A huge amount in 1920, but not enough for Carl Laemmle. Reining in the studio's runaway production costs would be Thalberg's first challenge. But Erich von Stroheim, Universal's most demanding director, wouldn't make it easy for him.
That was the era of the director, and Erich von Stroheim did things his own way and didn't care about budgets.
Irving Thalberg ultimately was a company man, and he knew very quickly that pictures would not make money if they went way over budget. That's where he and von Stroheim locked horns.
The first clash came over Foolish Wives, a film von Stroheim was already making when Thalberg was put in charge. To recreate the film's European locations, von Stroheim had insisted on filling Universal's back lot with a series of lavish and costly sets.
Giant, colossal sets of Monte Carlo, to be exact. The problem was, not just the sets, was the way that Erich von Stroheim filmed. He liked to film with great realism.
He also liked to keep filming until even the smallest detail of each scene was exactly right, no matter how long it took. After a year of this, Thalberg had had enough. But when he told von Stroheim to wrap things up, the director refused. And because von Stroheim was also the film's star and would never agree to finish the film under another director, there was little Thalberg could do but let him continue. He was determined to keep the cost down on von Stroheim's next production, a drama of class conflict and romance called The Merry-Go-Round. But once again, the director's obsession with realism and retakes took its toll.
When they had a banquet scene, there would be real caviar brought to the table, and all the actors were eating real caviar. Can you imagine caviar, even in the 1920s, was worth a lot of money in those days? These were some of the things that Irving Thalberg had to deal with.
But this time, Thalberg had an ace in the hole. He had made sure that Universal star Norman Carey, not von Stroheim, was cast in the film's leading role. When von Stroheim went over budget again, Thalberg was ready and able to play his trump.
He had to basically say, sorry, but you're not getting any more money. You can't shoot anymore. This is out of control. And in essence, fire him from his picture.
Von Stroheim howled in protest, but this time there was nothing he could do. Soon, everyone in Hollywood was buzzing about the young kid over at Universal who had dared to fire one of the most powerful directors in town.
This, you might say, was the beginning of a change when Hollywood realized that They needed control over the directors, and bit by bit, the director became less important.
What Thalberg recognized is that these people may be fantastically creative individuals, but they have no sense of money. And we need producers who can work with these individuals, get the most out of them creatively, but also control their profligate kinds of habits.
Thalberg wanted to be one of these new producers, but Laemmle said no.
Carl Laemmle did not want him to produce. He wanted him to stay in this position of studio manager because he needed him there.
In 1923, Thalberg, who could never forget the prediction that he would die young, decided it was time to move on. After entertaining offers from some of Hollywood's top studios, he signed up with a relative newcomer, Louis B. Mayer Productions. Thalberg's choice paid off on April 26, 1924, when Mayer merged his studio with two others to form Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer. The deal called for Thalberg to produce the movies, while Mayer ran the business.
They moved to the Metro lot in Culver City, which was a gigantic operation. And Thalberg, who was the creative part of the duo, was put in charge of production.
Production of not just one film, but many films, a whole slate of films. This was an incredible pressure on him, but he liked it. He thrived on this.
Thalberg was eager to prove himself in his new job. Once again, an out-of-control production someone else had started would give him his chance.
When Mayer and Thalberg took over MGM, they had a problem picture. It was called Ben-Hur. It had been shot by the previous regime in Rome and was done on a huge scale. But it didn't come together in a way that Thalberg thought it should.
But Thalberg was sure he could save Ben-Hur.
Thalberg never gave up on a picture. If a film came in and it wasn't very good, he said, okay, we'll make it better.
First, Thalberg fired the film's British director and sent Hollywood veteran Fred Niblo to Rome to start all over again. Then, to give this religious epic a little sex appeal, he sent up-and-coming MGM glamour boy Ramon Navarro along to play Ben-Hur. But Niblo's new footage still didn't measure up. So the frustrated Thalberg talked Mayer into ordering the production back to Los Angeles, where he could oversee it himself.
In a way, he was falling into this trap, this creativity trap that von Stroheim would do. He would spend extra money to make sure something was perfect.
He and Mayer built a Roman stadium in Culver City, and I remember seeing it because it was up for years and years. It was not at the studio, it was in some kind of a barren area, and they staged much of the movie there.
Hollywood watched in fascination as Thalberg assumed personal supervision of Ben-Hur's production. He obsessed over every detail of the scripts, sets, and costumes, reviewed the plans for the climactic chariot race, and personally approved the placement of the dozens of cameras that would record the action before he would allow filming to begin. And when the 3,900 extras in the stands didn't seem like enough, Thalberg sent the production manager out into Culver City to grab 400 more people off the street, slap them into togas, and add them to the crowd. But a year of hard work on Ben-Hur was taking its toll on Thalberg's delicate health. As the film neared completion, he collapsed and was rushed to the hospital. Thalberg, just 25 years old, had had a heart attack. He was still recovering in Los Angeles when Ben-Hur had its triumphant New York premiere on December 30th, 1925. Its epic scale and impressive artistry established the fledgling MGM as a major player in Hollywood, and Thalberg was given full credit for its success, even though he never allowed his name to appear on this or any other MGM film.
His theory was that anybody who has the power to give credit shouldn't take credit himself. And so during his lifetime, his name, Thalberg, never appeared on a movie.
But Hollywood knew who was behind Ben-Hur's resurrection. By the time he recovered from his heart attack and returned to work, Thalberg was being cheered as Hollywood's boy wonder, the brainy kid at MGM who had worked miracles with Ben-Hur.
And then, of course, other pictures followed. Big, expensive pictures that Irving seemed to control, the money and, of course, the creativity in them. And I guess this was the beginning of his career as being one of the most powerful production heads in Hollywood.
And the job came with some very nice perks, like the chance to party with Hollywood's rich and famous, and court glamorous MGM stars like Norma Shearer. Their 1927 marriage transformed the couple into Hollywood royalty and guaranteed them leading roles in Tinseltown's thriving social scene.
It wasn't all work for Irving Thalberg, especially after he married Norma Shearer, who liked to party, and Thalberg did too. He liked to get into the social scene and went to the major parties. You see pictures of him and Norma with a lot of stars.
But back at MGM, Thalberg was putting in long hours, driving himself hard, and demanding the best from those he hired and fired. No one in Hollywood had ever exerted such complete control over a studio's production.
He's an important power figure in Hollywood, a creative one and a financial one, heading up one of the largest companies in the world.
Thalberg was setting an example that would change the way movies were made.
More than anybody else, he kind of created the Hollywood studio system. His vision of what a studio should be and how it should be run and what the relationship should be between the head of the studio and the producers in the studio and the writers in the studio and the stars in the studio was really his.
He had an iron fist, and if a writer wasn't producing the pages that he wanted, he would drop the writer and hire another one. And he, as the producer, would determine when the script was finished and ready, and he would hand it to the director. And he would say, direct this. And he would start Monday. That was the way he wanted it done.
But Thalberg knew that none of his behind-the-scenes efforts would pay off unless he put the right stars up on the screen, stars who could lure ticket buyers into theaters. And if none of MGM's established personalities seemed right for a part, Thalberg never hesitated to go out and find a new one.
He had this artistic talent of not only how to pick a story, but how to pick a star.
One example certainly is Clark Gable. Other studios had had an opportunity to put him under contract. Warner Brothers, RKO, they both passed. They thought his ears were too big. They thought he wouldn't photograph that well, that he wasn't that good an actor. Thalberg felt differently, put him in the right kinds of roles, and he became a star in very short order. Joan Crawford was another one that Thalberg built up into a star when a lot of people thought that she would just always be a fringe player in Hollywood.
Thalberg wanted all of his stars to shine as brightly as they could, and was always looking for films that would help them sparkle. One of his most glittering was Grand Hotel, the story of a group of strangers whose lives intersect in Berlin.
Thalberg had many inventions during his career, and one of them was the all-star picture. He had all these stars under contract. So he said, well, here's this story, Grand Hotel, has some fabulous characters in it, and let's empty the star list. And so he did, with the two Barrymores and Garbo and Jean Hersholt and Wally Beery and Joan Crawford. It was a huge event in Hollywood that a studio would use so many stars in one picture. It turned out a huge success, won the Oscar.
Thalberg was on top in Hollywood. To be certain he stayed there, he developed his own method for ensuring that each MGM film had the broadest possible appeal.
One of the things he pioneered and became famous for is doing these previews out of town before the film was finished.
They would take the trolley to San Bernardino or Redlands or some outlying town and preview it there. Afterwards, they'd meet in the lobby of the theater, and Thalberg would say, well, we've got to retake that scene, throw out the romantic part, and start it all over again.
No film benefited from Thalberg's preview policy more than a Jean Harlow comedy called Red-Headed Woman.
Sally, I'm the happiest girl in the world. I'm in love and I'm going to be married. Gonna marry Albert? No, Kirsty. In love with Kirsty? No, out there.
When no one laughed during the film's preview, most of MGM's executives feared they had a flop on their hands. But Thalberg realized that the audience wasn't sure Harlow's scandalously sexual character, a secretary who sleeps her way to the top, was supposed to be funny. So he ordered writer Anita Luce to add some opening scenes to clue them in.
Listen, I'm on my way up to the boss's house with his mail. Why didn't his secretary do it? Because I swiped it off her desk. These are important and they've got to be answered right away. Maybe I'll get a chance to stay and take dictation.
At the next preview, the audience got the joke. The potential flop went on to be a hit for MGM. All because of Thalberg's determination to get it right.
He would keep tinkering with a film, working with it, and he was able to do amazing things with pictures that people had basically given up on, and then turn them into something special.
That was a part of the reason why MGM ascended so fast during that early talkie period and had one big hit after another, one Academy Award after another.
By the early 1930s, MGM was turning out a feature film every week and earning profits other studios could only dream of.
Of all the companies that were operating in Hollywood during that time, the only one that consistently made profits throughout the Depression was MGM. And the main reason for that, at least in the early 30s, was Thalberg.
Thalberg, who had always been admired, was now being deified. But by the early 30s, all the praise seemed to be rubbing Louis B. Mayer the wrong way.
Mayer saw that Thalberg was being hailed as the boy wonder in Hollywood, which indeed he was. And Mayer felt that he should get a bit of the credit too.
Plus, Thalberg was constantly badgering Mayer for more money. And he felt he deserved it, and he probably did.
Thalberg's once warm relationship with Mayer exploded in a series of intense confrontations over Irving's salary and role at the studio. Thalberg, still just 33 years old, won every one of these battles, but the strain was taking its toll. In late December 1932, he had the second heart attack he and everyone in Hollywood had been dreading for years.
It was quite serious. He had to be hospitalized, and he couldn't work for a number of months. So he and Norma went on a vacation to the Riviera, and that's when the knife fell in Culver City.
As Thalberg recuperated thousands of miles away, Mayer began preparing MGM to get along without him. He reorganized the studio and set up a new group of producers to do the work that Thalberg had been doing all alone.
That meant that these guys could operate basically autonomously, that there no longer was a Thalberg at the very top of the pyramid who had the final authority about everything.
Instead, these new producers would report directly to Mayer. If and when Thalberg returned to MGM, he would be expected to join their ranks. He was still in Europe when he learned of the coup.
He really felt it was a slap in the face, and he was greatly distressed and had a relapse.
Mayer insisted that he had to make the change, not just to save the studio, but to save the overworked Thalberg, too.
From Mayer's point of view, he could take the high road and make this claim that, yeah, I'm doing this so that you're not going to have another heart attack, so that you won't have to worry about so many pictures, you won't have to worry about all of the stars, all of the different minutiae of running a studio. But I'm sure that his real goal was to marginalize Thalberg as much as he could so that he could then be the face of MGM.
Thalberg would never forgive Mayer, but he refused to walk away from MGM. He swallowed his pride, returned to the studio, and threw himself into his work as just one of many producers making movies on the lot.
The doctor said that if he rested and regimented his work schedule, that maybe he'd be fine. Everyone just held their breath, and things went on in the hope that maybe a miracle would happen and maybe he would live to be an old man and everybody would be happy and live forever after.
Soon, Thalberg was back to producing some of MGM's most prestigious pictures. One of the best was his 1935 Academy Award winner, Mutiny on the Bounty.
But remember, sir, I shall demand a court of inquiry in England.
You mutinous dog.
Retract that, sir.
I will repeat it. You're a mutinous dog.
Mutiny on the Bounty was another example of a huge hit. It was something that was a gamble for Thalberg. It was a huge production. Had to shoot it off Catalina, and shooting on the ocean is often very perilous. But he got it through, and that was part of his success, that he would persevere.
That success and the security it brought to his growing family meant everything to Irving Thalberg. But his friends and co-workers feared that he was once again burning the candle at both ends.
He was working hard again. He was at another party, stayed up too late, and then he started to develop sniffles, which developed into pneumonia. And that's almost the kiss of death for someone that has a heart condition. The inevitable was coming. Everybody knew it, especially when the doctors ordered that he have a oxygen mask put on.
The long-dreaded end finally came to Thalberg at his Santa Monica beach house on September 14th, 1936.
All of a sudden, he's gone. And Louis B. Mayer was one of the first to know, and he ran there to the beach house. And the arrangements started to be made to quietly and, I guess, tactfully tell the industry that this titan is gone.
Why is it the great men always go so early? Asked Groucho Marx when he heard the news. The Schlemiels live to be 100. Tough Hollywood veterans like Darrell F. Zanuck and Samuel Goldwyn just broke down and cried. And they weren't alone.
It was a romantic tragedy, you might say, because he died at a very early age, 37, having accomplished a great deal.
As his funeral began, the other studios darkened their stages for 5 minutes in honor of their fallen rival. MGM shut down production for the entire day, so Thalberg's colleagues could mourn the tragic end of one of Hollywood's greatest stories.
There was a mourning period for Thalberg like nobody else in the history of the industry, and that's part of the reason that he's remembered today. They immediately came up with the idea of the Thalberg Award, which is what keeps his name alive. The greatest producers to this day think of themselves as his descendants. They all want to be like him. They all want to have the vision that he had, the ability to work with other people productively that he had, and the basic sense of what a good movie was that he had. So his legacy is enormous.